Caseus, Jedi Apprentice. The following is a fan-written Star Wars story following a Jedi student in the era of the prequels, 6 years after the events of The Phantom Menace. This story is non-canon to any and all events in the Star Wars series. Chapter 1. The morning sun shone through the open window of the 12th level room of the temple's living quarters, reflecting off of the mirror of the well-organized desk, directly into the sleeping eyes of the young Jedi student. He shut his eyes tighter until the light was too bright to ignore. It was time to get up. Sitting up, still half asleep, he cleaned himself up, straightening his dark brown hair, and put on his tunic and robes neatly folded at the foot of his bed. Buckling his boots, he stood up and retrieved his lightsaber from his desk, attaching it to his belt before leaving the room and walking down the ancient steps to the meditation chambers on the lower levels. As much as he hated waking up so early, he always enjoyed visiting the meditation chamber. It was quiet, peaceful. Walking into the chamber, the young man stood before his master, already deep in meditation. She was a tall woman, slender of frame with deeply tanned skin and silvery white hair tied back in a bun. "You're late, Caseus." "Forgive me, Master. He struggled to think of an excuse. "You were sleeping, if I'm not mistaken. Have a seat." Caseus walked to the cushioned seat across from his master and sat with his legs crossed and his palms on his knees. "Shall we begin, Padawan?" "Yes, Master." "There is no emotion. There is peace. There is no ignorance. There is knowledge. There is no passion. There is serenity. There is no chaos. There is harmony. There is no death. There is the Force." Caseus had repeated these words every day for well over 16 years. By this time in his life, the Jedi Code seemed to leave his mouth without any thought. They comforted him, as though repeating these words was a way of telling himself that there was nothing to fear, nothing to worry about. He remembered so little of his life before the Jedi. Vague images in the far recesses of his mind of his parents. He didn't miss them much. How could he miss, after all, two people he hardly knew? Still, he always held a semblance of regret that he would never fully know his parents. It wasn't as though he was alone in the galaxy. Master Kukuri Takai had given him plenty of encouragement and support since she took him as her apprentice. He was truly thankful that he was selected to be trained at all. His skills as a youngling were nothing impressive, especially when compared to several other students. Yet Master Takai saw something in him. What that something was, he had no idea. "I've noticed great improvement in your training, Caseus. Despite your lack of discipline when it comes to showing up on time, your devotion to becoming a fully fledged member of the Order is admirable." "Thank you, Master. I'm humbled and honored to be your student." "Do not mistake my praise for permission to slack. As much as you've grown in the past 6 years, you still have much to learn, not only of the wider galaxy, but of the nature of the Force." "Master?" She stood from the chair and straightened her robes. "Come, it's time for your exercises. We can talk more at lunch." "Yes, Master." Caseus stood and followed her. Daily exercises were always a chore, but he told himself that every drop of sweat and every bruise would bring him closer and closer to becoming a Jedi. It was what he wanted most, not merely to finally speak to his master as equals, but to see the galaxy beyond the few planets he was assigned to visit with his master. Entering the training grounds under a particularly warm mid-morning sun, Caseus set his outer robe aside and began his stretches. "Shall we begin with the basics?" "Master, I can handle the training remotes with my eyes closed. Maybe we can try something more challenging?" He wasn't lying, of course. As part of his lightsaber training was learning to deflect blaster shots from the training remotes with his eyes completely covered. "Even the greatest of Jedi practice the fundamentals. I expect nothing less of my students." "All right, send them out." Removing his lightsaber from his belt, Caseus ignited the shimmering emerald blade. He had only built it 3 years prior, and yet he couldn't picture his life without it. It had truly become an extension of himself. Activating a panel on the control matrix, Master Takai began the exercise, calling out 3 training remotes which slowly began to encircle Caseus like small moons orbiting a system of planets. The hum of Caseus' blade as it deflected the first shot echoed through the training grounds. He then deflected another, then another, then another. His movements were fluid, as though a stream of water was flowing throughout every cell in his body. The exercise soon ended. Next was the obstacle course. He had run the same course hundreds of times, anticipating every leap, roll, and step before even seeing it. Running through the course, his movements enhanced by the Force, he soon completed this exercise as well, setting a new personal record in the process. Very impressive, Caseus. Step into the dueling circle. We will review your technique. Caseus nodded, approaching the dueling circle with his master. Unlike the remotes and the obstacle course, his master was not predictable. Never once had he gotten the upper hand during this exercise, but it wasn't as though he expected to do so. His master activated her weapon, unleashing the sapphire blade from its hilt. Remember, Surisu is purely a defensive form. It will serve you well in dire circumstances. Pair it with another form, and you will be a formidable opponent. Formidable might be a strong word depending on the competition. The 2 Jedi stood at the ready. Caseus had taken a keen interest in 2 particular forms of lightsaber combat, Surisu and Gemso. His master, however, was far more adept with a lightsaber than he was, and her extensive experience and knowledge always gave her the upper hand. Caseus could scarcely imagine how formidable she would be if she actually wanted to hurt him. Begin. Caseus lunged, striking at his master, running through the points of contact in his mind. Master Takai, on the other hand, had blocked every attack as though it were effortless. Concentrate. Your mind must be in the battle. Caseus could tell that his attacks were far from effective, and soon found himself on the defensive, trying to block and counter the various strikes from his master. Excellent footwork. Remember, stay light on your feet, but keep your stance grounded. Otherwise... With a swift sweep of her foot, Master Takai knocked Caseus off balance, sweeping his right foot from under him, causing him to stumble back, dropping his guard. His face was soon a mere inch away from the tip of his master's blade. Your blade work is improving, but your footwork needs improvement. You're thinking too much. Let the Force guide your movements. The teacher and pupil would spar for several more rounds with little progress being made. Finally, the exercise was complete, and Caseus would stop to breathe. That's enough for now. Go fetch us some water and we can discuss what needs to be improved. Yes, Master. I'm sorry. I'm trying. Do not apologize, Padawan. You are learning. Every mistake is a lesson learned. Remember, the path to becoming a Jedi is not a path that can be traveled in a single day. I know you're trying, but to simply try implies a lack of confidence in your abilities. Don't try. Do. When you realize this, you'll find that nothing is impossible. Yes, Master. Caseus left the training grounds and went to the kitchen, retrieving 2 canisters of water. Master Takai always fascinated him. That someone could be so strict and reserved, and yet so kind and wise was truly beyond his comprehension. Returning to the training grounds, he saw his master in conversation with a tall Jedi with brown robes and long, graying brown hair. Caseus, come here. I'd like you to meet Master Sindralig, the temple's foremost swordsman. It's a pleasure to make your acquaintance, Padawan. Bowing, Caseus showed Master Dralig the proper respect he was taught to show every master since he was a child. It's a pleasure to meet you, Master. I've heard much about you. Caseus, Master Dralig was hoping to observe what you've learned so far. Perhaps you would be so kind as to demonstrate your skills for him. Of course. Stepping aside to the dueling circle, Caseus activated his lightsaber and began running through the Form 5 drills he had been studying. Of course, his technique was far from perfect, and he could see it in the old master's expression. I see a lot of potential in you, Padawan, but your skills require a fair bit of fine-tuning before that potential can be reached. I notice that your footwork is uneven between movements. In the heat of battle, even a single mistake can be catastrophic. Caseus nodded. His words seemed harsh, though he knew every word was true. He had been slacking when it came to his footwork, more preoccupied with the movement of the blade. "I'd like to introduce you to my apprentice. Sarah?" From the other room entered a young woman with black braided hair and a rather unamused expression on her face. "This is my Padawan, Sarah Cateau. She's quickly becoming one of my finest pupils. If it's all right with your master, I would like to see the two of you spar for a bit. I've seen you run through your basic drills, but I'd be very much interested in seeing you in combat."
"Of course I don't mind. I think it would be very beneficial for Caseus to spar with an unfamiliar opponent."
Caseus nodded and stepped into the dueling circle with Sarah. Something about her seemed cold. Not unpleasant, but as though she had no interest in sparring with someone like him. "Ready your weapons." The Padawans ignited their sabers. Two shining green blades crossed, waiting for the signal. "Begin." Caseus was immediately caught off guard as Sarah rushed towards him, flipping over his head and landing behind him, ready to strike. Caseus immediately fell on the defensive, falling back on his Form 3 Sarisu. The two blades clashed as Sarah began increasing the pace of the duel, pushing the offensive and forcing Caseus to rely on everything he had learned. Sidestepping her next attack, Caseus saw his opportunity to push his own offense, and struck at her leg only for Sarah to spin her blade to a reverse grip, catching his attack and spinning his weapon out of his hand. Caseus called upon the force, leaping back to gain some distance and calling his saber to his hand. He had scarcely enough time to activate his weapon when Sarah closed the distance between them and swung at his torso, causing Caseus to stumble back, falling onto his back. Sarah moved in to finish the fight when Caseus set a force push at his opponent, knocking her back to the ground and giving him the opportunity to stand. As he stepped to his feet, Sarah did the same, clearly annoyed and slightly embarrassed at having been pushed on the defensive. The two would clash again, locking blades in a flurry of motion when Sarah grabbed Caseus by his weapon hand, twisting her body with impressive flexibility, and managed to remove the lightsaber from his hand, holding both blades crossed at his chin, ending their duel. "Very well done. An excellent showing from both of you. Sarah, very impressive. To disarm your opponent and gain their weapon in the same movement. And Caseus, you seem to finally rely solely on your instincts when you were pushed to the defensive. Though I would recommend you try to maintain a tighter grip on your weapon. Speaking of which, Sarah?" Sarah nodded, deactivating the lightsabers and handing Caseus his weapon back, a small grin of satisfaction on her face. Drolig turned to Kikuri. "I will be sure to keep tabs on his progress, Master Takai. If he pushes himself, he may prove to be quite the swordsman."
"Thank you. I will be sure he keeps on top of his exercises. Hopefully their next bout will be just as impressive." With that, Master Drolig and Sarah departed the training grounds, though not before Sarah would give a not-so-subtle glance to Caseus, who himself was feeling less than thrilled.
"Very impressive, Caseus." "It didn't feel impressive. It felt like I lost big time."
"You will not win every conflict, Caseus. Even Master Yoda himself would attest to this. Defeat is rarely without silver lining. You might have been defeated, but you demonstrated your resourcefulness and skill to a great master who seems to have taken an interest in your abilities."
"I suppose."
"Why don't you go and relax? Clear your mind. I think this has been enough for today."
With a nod, Caseus grabbed his robe and began to walk through the doors to the temple interior.
"Caseus."
He stopped and turned to his master.
"Try to be on time tomorrow."
With a smile, Caseus bowed to her and went inside. Maybe she was right. He lost, but he did gain a lot of credibility with one of the best duelists in the Order. Caseus walked through the temple, admiring the ancient architecture and the elegant decor. Soon, he found himself at his favorite spot, the front steps of the Jedi Temple. Here, he could sit and look over the Coruscant skyline in peace. Even as he watched the distant speeders and cargo freighters zoom through the far-off buildings, his mind was occupied thinking of that girl. She got the better of him this time. Next time would be different, though. He could feel it.